Good morning. This is your host, Llorraine Neithardt. You've reached Venus Unplugged. And what we do here in Venus Unplugged is I speak extemporaneously, which I think is a marvelous word, on the archetypal theme of Venus in our life and in our hearts and our dreams. And fairy tales, myths. What I am exploring now is the inferior function, all right, or commonly known as our blind spot. Now, this is a theory that Jung came up, I think it was in around 1923, about the four types, which are commonly known as sensation, is opposite of intuition. So sensation is the facts, nothing but the facts, ma'am. That's all we want to know, all right? And intuition is the part of our psyche or our being where we kind of sniff out the possibilities. It's just kind of like quantums. And those two can drive one another crazy. One person is saying, well, I just see it like completely different. The other person says, like, where are you coming up with this? All right, so then and this can be happening internally too. Like one party is going like, whoa, we don't have any facts on this. It's like, yeah, but I'm going to do it anyway. I'm just going to try it, all right? Or we're too fearful to try something on an intuitive level because we don't know what the outcome's going to be, which can get pretty dull if we don't make these quantums every now and again. And the feeling type, all right, so that is the emotional, where our emotional values or where the hot spots are. Now, the hot spots doesn't mean that it's negative. It just means it is hot. It is alive. And if you touch that in the wrong way or the wrong moment, you're going to have an explosion. Opposite the thinking type, which is the basic structure. So the conversation between a feeling type and a thinking type would be like, my feelings, you just, and they start getting really excited and sometimes even a little bit hysterical. And the thinking type is like, whoa, what's the structure here that and the thinking type is trying to figure out. How did this even come about? And the feeling type is undone. All right. Now, these four types are in all of us. And so whatever is called the superior, he wrote this in 1923, so the inferior and superior sometimes it can be misinterpreted. But the superior is the one, it's our go-to part of ourselves. Mine is intuition. I'm going to make that leap. I can't. That's the most natural thing to me, all right? The inferior would be the sensate. Many times I'll be traveling or have traveled, and somebody said, well, where'd you stay? I said, I don't know where I'm staying. It's on a piece of paper. I'll find it when I get there. And they're like, what? You don't know where you're staying? I said, yeah, I know where I'm staying, but it's not, important right now. It will be important when I get in front of it. Now, for a person who needs to plan everything, that's terrifying. What do you mean you don't know? I know, but it's not. That's not where my strength is. Okay. Or with let's say the thinking type, when you're looking at the basic structure of something, how does this work? How does this operate? Opposite the feeling, it's cats and dogs. Nobody knows what anybody else is talking about. So the superior function is where we go to first, all right? And there's something called the Myers-Briggs test, which is also a combination of the Jungian archetypes, which is fun to do. But for myself personally, I don't trust just taking self-tests. It's like you need somebody objective. So, and we can get too caught up in, all these initials on this and on that. But the important thing is to really understand how this functions, what these functions are about for communication, all right? And then what he talks about is the extroverted and introverted. So the extroverted is going to kind of go out in the world and act out in the world, all right? And the introverted goes into their inner world. So if it makes sense internally, they're cool, okay? So most of our energy goes, so we have the superior function, and then the second and third, and then the inferior function. So what I'll focus on for the next couple of weeks is this inferior function. Because in truth, that's where the gold is. And that is where it's, it's like stinky. It's the part of us like it's, oh, God, this so blows, or I don't want to know about this. When in fact, in a sense, it's virgin territory because it's where we won't go. I mean, if I want to trigger my inferior function, somebody just has to say to me, well, what's your password? And I can crumble right there. If they ask me about the archetypes or the mind of the divine, I jump right in. I don't think about it, that I'll get lost in it or I'll go insane. Who cares? I'm in it. All right. So when we know to the best of this ability, or we sense it, like what just happened? Why did the communication fall apart? Now, this can also be happening internally. Now, if there's a problem to be solved or an issue that you want understanding about, it's a good idea, if you know what your superior function is, and then kind of go around to the other functions. Right? So let's say it's thinking. It's like, yeah, I kind of understand that and what's it about, and A led to B and B led to C and blah, blah. Yeah. Then, well, what are the facts about that? And then we start finding out, oh, well, I didn't know that was the rule, or that happened here, or, and anything that we do in life, it has a structure, but it also has its rules and regulations and its facts. So let's say you're applying for something, and people will get very upset and say, well, what do you need that information for? It's like, that's the fact they need to calibrate whether they're going to give you a loan or not, or whatever it is that you want. So you don't have to understand why. That's what they need. Unless, of course, you get a sense. It's like, wait a second, this is a little too private information. They don't need this information. And then you don't do it. Okay. But then on a feeling level, which would be the inferior function, so when a thinking type, which has a handle on how everything works, but if they trip over, if it starts getting too emotional or too feeling, they lose their cookie. They can't grasp it. And that's when we know we have fallen into the function. And it's inferior because it's the part that we never use. It's the uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that you don't have it. You have it. But it's kind of like life. It saves the best for last. So what I do, just so I can be more aware, is sometimes I'll give myself, it's like, you know what, I am really going to try to the best of my ability, to live in the state of my inferior function today. What's going on? So it's terribly uncomfortable. And then, I look around, I say, oh, that little pile of papers over there that I didn't get around to filing, although I'm very organized, I don't always get to that part. So I hate it, but I do it consciously, feeling how uncomfortable. It's just a task. It's no biggie. But I'm in a place where it's not familiar. I don't know the rules. I don't know how to trick it out. Okay? And I just have to stick with the facts, right? Which is, for an intuitive type, boring. But that's okay, because when you start working with the inferior function, all sorts of other things will be made clear eventually. But it's terribly, terribly uncomfortable. So in relationships, if we know what our friend or a lover or a relative, what their function is, we know where we're going to get in trouble in communication. Or if we really want to communicate and let's say the other is a feeling person, if you don't involve the feelings, they need to hear those words. It was so sad. Or, oh, gosh, that's so sad. You don't need an answer. You don't need to give them a litany on, the psychodynamics of their problem. It's just sad. And they feel related to. But if you just stick with the facts, they're going to want to kill you because they're so cold. What they told me, these were the statistics and these were the facts. And they didn't relate. So these are general terms, okay? It's actually the more it's a slippery, slidery slope, especially when you read Jung's Psychological Types, which is an absolute tome when he was developing. And he says himself that he has no particular knowledge or doesn't even know why he, selected these four, but it seems to work, and it does work. Now, whatever our inferior is, it doesn't matter whether it's sensate, the facts, thinking, the basic structure, intuition, the possible directions, that kind of quantum, okay, or the emotional hotspots on the feeling level. Whatever is inferior, that's the ticket. Now, cultures have inferior function. Let's say, for example, these Twitter storms that are happening, right? That's a thinking type on crack. They just don't, and it's like you get emotional. It's like, what kind of dumbass thing is this? Don't they see? No, they're just gonna, and it's extroverted, So the introvert is the person who what they value and what's important is what goes on internally. They relate it to how does that feel inside. And the extroverted person is going to do everything outside. America is an extroverted thinking country, right? So we know just from that we have to develop more compassion and on a feeling level, all right? And our inferior functions is also where the others sense our prejudice, or they sense that we have no connection there, we have no knowledge there. So it's very interesting to start seeing this in terms of perception. If a person doesn't have a connection, they don't have a connection. Or if just through observation, what their inferior function, you got to spend some extra time understanding that if somebody has an inferior function in the sensate, you got to ask them what the facts are, and then you got to watch them melt down, because it's as if they're in planet Zebulon or something. I mean, it's just, what are you talking about? All right. Now, what Jung talks about is in order to connect, because this is what I'm going for here, all right, is being able to connect to the inferior function. And why? The importance of it. Because that's where the gold is. It's as if it's a virginal part of our psyche. And so when we touch the inferior function, so not only do we touch our own personal unconscious, but we also touch upon the collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious is all the primitive, archetypal, raw forces, which some people would consider hell, but it's really not hell. It's just everything that we don't know. It's that. So it's, where it's dynamite is what it is. And this is why it can come up so explosive if we're not aware, or we can have an argument with somebody or a huge misunderstanding, and we're never going to understand if we don't figure out, oh, wait a second, that person needs to be related to in a different way, or you can help somebody by going, really an intuitive type, so, you're bugging me down, you're dragging me out with all these facts. Just give it to me. Just tell me what you want, okay? And the person who wants to, because sometimes when people are so sensate, you feel like you're turning to stone. It's like, would you just get to the point here so you can be set free? And no, they've got to tell you, and then we took a left, and then we went a right, and then we blinked, and it's like, oh, Lord, get me out of here. So these are the, just in everyday life, okay? And also when we see the state of the world, we're in a sea of the inferior function. And that's also the other reason I want to start looking at this is because, in general, people are feeling very helpless. And their old tricks aren't working. And yet we can rant and rage about what is right and what is wrong, but that's not changing anything. What's going to change is, as each person says, I got to dig into my own inferior function and see what's going on there. And not that we can ever see clearly. That's what the messy part is like we have to, because it's going to come up anyway. And so if we look at it that way and say, oh, okay, the culture is really, the indication is that there's great and eventual positive change, but we've got to go through this really icky, sticky period, okay? So in order to connect to the inferior function, if fate just doesn't, or psyche just doesn't pull you in, because she'll just, set you up, because psyche is ruthlessly dragging you to your individuation, who you are, your individual pattern. And we can go with some dignity, or we can go squealing like little pigs, but she's going to take us. The more we can cooperate, in some ways it doesn't make it any easier, but it certainly makes it understandable, and we can then, let's say, work with the inferior function, or do a dance or a song or art or something that moves that energy. So what Jung talks about is like to have the energy. So you have to have the energy in order to activate the inferior function. Now, we usually can't do this as an act of will because it's our blind spot, right? Life will set us up. And then, so if you don't get the energy away from the superior function, right, where else is the energy going to come from? And if you leave all your energy and will in the superior function, you slowly kind of go to hell because it sucks you dry. And that's, let's say, people will go through a midlife crisis and suddenly a person who's, very much like the engineer and has to know everything and all the facts, and then suddenly buys a red sports car and drives west or something. It's like, what? What was that about? There's so much energy and libido, which is energy, untapped, untouched. And the superior function, our go-to personality function, is sucking us dry. And we are in hell because it gets dry and weird and one-sided. And it doesn't have the richness of, in a sense, of the chaos, the primordial or creative chaos. When we first enter it or get thrown into it, it is a nightmare. It's like, whose acid trip am I in? And yet when we start calibrating differently, or just realizing, oh, I'm not in the desert, I'm in this place that I have no reference point. So the conscious access is very different, where we realize, oh, and then when we hit the primitive or the primordial, that's when we can be positively infantile, where we just flipped out. So Jung writes in this tome of a book, Psychological Types by C.G. Jung, Gustav, right? Okay, so under sensation, I include all, this is Jung, quoting Jung, okay. Under sensation type, I include all perceptions by means of the sense organs, so the facts. By thinking, I mean the function of the intellectual cognition and the forming of logical conclusions, A to B to C. Feeling is a function of subjective valuation. And intuition I take as a perception by way of the unconscious or perceptions of unconscious contexts. Now, it's interesting because very often that comes off as, something smells off here. Or we have a dream and we're smelling something in a dream. It's like, okay, I don't know exactly what it is, but I have to trust it until I, get in there and then start figuring. Or if you're kind of intuitively sensing something. Now, you can intuitively sense something, but your interpretation is completely and utterly off. All right? So something feels off, and then let's say that's our inferior function. Intuition is our inferior function. So we get nervous, something stinks, something smells off. And then we'll try to work out the inferior function by going to our superior function, which in that case would be facts. And we make up some facts. Well, they may be facts, but they have nothing to do with what you're sensing. So we cannot solve or relate to the inferior function by using our other functions. We got to stay in the mud because it's a whole other world. It's an untapped world that is also potent with the unconscious, your own personal unconscious. And as I said last week, the unconscious isn't a place. It's not locale. It's all around us, in and through. And then the collective, the primordial, the beginning of time. So the inferior function, it refuses to go along with the other functions. And it goes on its own. Now, this is all happening, and we don't know it until there's an eruption. Now, let's say somebody's inferior function gets triggered. Then they tyrannize everybody. You don't know what the person blew up about, and you're not quite sure, but man, I'm not going near there. And they don't know. Now, if there's enough maturity or dignity or care, even if the person can reflect and go, that was really out of bounds, man, and just say that, I don't know what got into me. I still feel that, I've got something of value to contribute or say here, but the way that I went about it certainly needs correction. Then that's okay. But if we stay stuck in it because we're having a momentary seizure of the inferior function, everybody around us knows it. But they comes up as these negative impulses, and they overwhelm us because we're not in conscious relationship to what stirs us up. And then, if we're not in conscious relationship with what stirs us up, then we tend to project that the cause is onto another. We can't handle it. Like, this is not of me. I have no connection to it. Where is this coming from? Oh, it must be that other person, or that other country, or that other belief system, or that other race, or whatever it is. It just comes up, and if we could understand this more, we could have more compassion and certainly more tolerance for our own blind spots and the blind spots of others. When people are projecting whatever it is that they're projecting, we can pretty much know, and that doesn't mean you wipe out their perception, because projection always has a hook. There's always a little bit of truth. So as long as there's even a little teensy little bit of truth in it, we still got to work with it and own it if we want to individuate. If you just want to be an unwelcome guest on this earth and make it worse, well, then, mazel tov, go do that too. All right? So when that gets triggered, or let's say a man gets caught up in, say, his feeling function is not developed, right? Now, these functions can come out like in any, it can come out through the shadow, it can come out through the anima animus, all this. He's just going to be like a crazy old maid and just like, oh, gosh. And nobody's going to go near him, right? Because it's terrifying, and he's frustrated because he doesn't even know what happened. So this is the active ingredient in so much of what goes on in the world that is unpleasant or negative, and we need negative. Negative is the plot. We like negative. It's not always comfortable, but it makes it interesting. So we know we're in the inferior function when we can't get a handle on it, or, we just blow up about something, or opposite of blowing up, we go cold. Okay. There are times when, you're taking your life in your hands by touching upon somebody's inferior function, unless they ask, like, do you see what's going on with me here? We ask for a mirroring, all right? And now if we ask somebody who is in our inferior function, it's a very interesting conversation, it's a very worthwhile conversation, but it's going to take several conversations to understand. And it's like, we can disagree on people's, whatever their opinion is, but we can't disagree or somebody's experience. Their experience is their experience. And so the experience would be their function. So run out of time talking about inferior function. And we're going to continue with this discussion and exploration because it is really where the gold is. Because it brings new life to us after the realm of chaos, of course. So this way we can start understanding when it looks like somebody's lost their mind completely, and if we're feeling misunderstood and unaccepted, it only increases our sense of helplessness in the face of blundering behavior or emotions seem to happen to us. And just take a little time and explore it. It's where we feel totally inadequate. That's where it lies. But it is gold, unprocessed genius in many ways. So next week, we will be speaking about the inferior function. Bye-bye.